It's working now. Thank you, guys. Representative Ledbetter, if you could lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the
Okay, if the members could introduce themselves, starting from my left.
State Representative Abby Majors, 60th District, Armstrong, and Westmoreland counties.
Good morning, everyone. State Representative Robert Ledbetter, representing the 109th District, consisting of all of Columbia County.
Dallas Kephart, 73rd District, Clearfield and Cambria County.
Representative Josh Kale, Beaver, Washington counties.
Representative Brian Smith, representing right here in Jefferson County, the town of Punxsutawney, District 66. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for watching today.
Good morning, everyone. Jim Struzzi, 62nd Legislative District, Indiana County, including the home of the main campus of IUP.
And we also have Chairwoman Donna Oberlander with us today. She'll be back in a minute. And Representative David Rowe will be joining us as well. And we do have a couple of representatives online with us as well. Representative Ham, Representative Wentley. Others will be bouncing on and off as the hearing goes. And for those that are online, if you have a question, you could text me that you have a question or put your hand up. If I don't notice your hand being up, texting me is probably the best way to go forward. Representative Smith, thank you for having us here in the 66th District. Had a great time last night with IUP Culinary, hosting a dinner for us. I gotta say, I gotta throw a plug out for them because the dinner was absolutely fantastic. The food that was made, the way they presented it, it was just a wonderful dinner. So thank you very much. Thank you to Dr. Driscoll. Thank you to Christina Korn for organizing our visit here. You guys have been so hospitable in everything that you've done. We really do appreciate it. So with that, we are going to have a couple of IUP deans share how IUP is supporting the advancement of key Commonwealth healthcare, workforce, and economic solutions. Dr. Hillary Creeley, Dean of the IUP School of Graduate Studies and Research, and Dr. Miko Rose, founding Dean of the IUP Proposed College of Osteopathic Medicine. I've been hearing so much about this proposed hospital. We talked about it last night. I'm looking forward to hearing more. So, ladies, doctors, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So good morning and welcome to IUP's Punxsutawney campus. As shared, my name is Hillary Creeley and I'm the Dean of the School of Graduate Studies and Research. On behalf of IUP, I want to thank all of you for being here and for the opportunity today to share with you some of the exciting ways that through our research and teaching activities, IUP and the 10 universities that comprise the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, PASHE, are an important resource for the Commonwealth that make a difference in the health, economy, and workforce. PASHE makes a statewide impact not only on the students who learn at our affordable and excellent universities, but also on the safety of our workforce, our appreciation for the environment and natural resources, including the health of our forests and streams, our understanding of history and culture, and our preparation to meet the evolving needs in healthcare, education, technology, and all sectors of the economy. One of the greatest impacts in the health of Pennsylvania and its peoples and communities is a project we're working on. And to tell you more about this initiative underway, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Miko Rose, the founding dean of IUP's Proposed College of Osteopathic Medicine.
Thank you. So when we think about rural areas and we think about rural health, how many of you see this as a current crisis, particularly in Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to read some statistics that interestingly were taken years before COVID even hit with the Great Resignation, where many of you know healthcare was hit the hardest. So within rural health, despite decades of groundbreaking advancements in medicine, and these are quotes directly from research articles, life in rural U.S. often means lives cut short by heart disease, cancer, unintentional injuries, lung problems, and stroke at higher rates than in urban areas. It is referenced in healthcare as a rural disadvantage, meaning that the healthcare disparities are so distinct there are excess deaths that could have been prevented just documented through living in rural areas in comparison to urban counterparts. And this is a gap in terms of access to care and outcomes in health. When we look at public policy health measures, those in urban areas benefit significantly from advancements in medicine, from technologies and diseases such as cancer that have much higher cure rates. And yet in urban and in rural areas, those numbers are the same and also dwindling in terms of cure rates and what we now call unnecessary deaths. So for example, in 2004, in comparison to urban communities, rural counties experienced more than 35,000 additional deaths. Flash forward to 2016, in rural counties, the number of excess deaths for rural counties above the number of deaths expected under normal conditions ballooned to 61,000 annually. So in less than 15 years, that number almost doubled. This reflects an increase of 75% in the last 12 years, and that data was taken in 2016. We do anticipate that in the last 10 years, particularly with the impact of COVID, which we're still measuring and seeing the impact, that's dramatically increased. And so these aspects of rural health and access to healthcare is a crisis that we know well, and IUP has been very innovative and inspired. I was brought into the task years into IUP's charge to look at some innovative ways to address this challenge of rural health, not just throughout Pennsylvania and Western Pennsylvania, but to set a standard for rural health where we can look at innovative and creative models to solve this problem. As Einstein had stated, you're not going to solve the problem at the level that it was created. And in similar approach, looking at creative and innovative ways, particularly with collaborations, community infrastructure, and community collaborations, some of which you've literally and metaphorically tasted with the culinary and some of our future efforts with food as medicine. So when we look at some of the areas and ways that we can address this, one of the things that Dean Creeley and I started to look at is if we're going to solve the rural healthcare crisis, let's look at the data. Some of the data you have before you, it's a joint state government commission report. It was actually published with data based on 2015 and 2016, released and published in 2021, a staff study from the Joint State Government Commission within Pennsylvania of the impact of medical schools. Interestingly, I came across this report months into my accepting the role of founding dean of IUP Medical School, and the charges and highlights of what they have recommended and other literature has recommended to solve this rural healthcare crisis are all initiatives and measures that we have started to create and moving forward. Some of those involve primarily recruiting from rural, underserved areas, individuals who themselves may not consider a career in medicine, right? I just talked with a member of your great leadership this morning even. We're not necessarily looking for the students who are going to serve the rural crisis who have always considered careers in medicine. It turns out when I sat in a dinner one of my first weeks as the founding dean at IUP, talking to physicians who've been in practice in rural areas like Punxsutawney, areas like Indiana, and asked them, you've been practicing primary care and different aspects of medicine for decades in rural regions. And we asked around the room, how many of you are first generations? Every single one of the hands went up in the room. So we know that there is something about rural physicians in practice who are dedicated in service to their communities, much like all of you, that they were inspired to become physicians and didn't have long lineages of families who were physicians. In fact, for all of the ones that we could find, and I keep looking, so far we found one who, it's maybe a second generation. We see that these are first generation physicians. They were inspired by community service and leadership first, and had the science basis and dedication towards healthcare second. What I have seen time and time again in my years and years of work, both as a medical trainee, a physician, and throughout working with a number of universities in medical education, is that we can't teach heart. We can't teach the service commitment. We can inspire students to consider it, but we need to flip the model of picking the valedictorians and the 4.0s and then trying to instill a sense of heart and service later versus picking the 3.8s and the 3.9s. And you all know them. There are students who you know right now are applying to medical school, and you hope and pray that they can get into medical school, but we're not sure if they're going to get in. Those students who have the greatest hearts and service and indices of growth, resilience, and high determination through personality measures that Dean Creeley and I are working on a research project that we believe will have significant precedence once the data is processed through Pennsylvania to show models throughout the nation for rural recruitment, personality traits and characteristics, demographics and histories that have high determinants that they're likely to serve and return to rural regions as leaders within their communities. So we pick them for their service orientation first, and also ensure that they have high enough science scores so that those students we're all wondering about if they'll get into medical school this upcoming year, those students will be our target demographic, and we will recreate medical education and recruitment based on those qualities. We'll also make sure that they have academic supports and additional measures, and we know that these students on outputs, when we look at the workforce in the industry, osteopathic medical students have a higher percentage, even without a rural focus on recruitment, to enter primary care, where we know in our rural underserved areas, not just throughout Pennsylvania, but through the country, are needed the most. We have the highest rate of return to primary care, to underserved areas, and to rural regions. This school will be the first public osteopathic medical school in the state of Pennsylvania. In bolstering the Pennsylvania state system, PASHE, and creating this medical school in collaboration, we'll be bolstering the PASHE state system, supporting our public state schools with collaborative healthcare programs with the other schools so that we are recruiting students from all of the PASHE regions throughout the state of Pennsylvania to create a model of recruitment, retention, and then returning to the communities from which they were already leaders. Some other highlights of impact from having a medical school. We've had a number of surveys, and we have some public data regarding some infrastructure and research that was done. It will demonstrate increased number of primary care physicians, improved healthcare access, significant economic growth and job creation, enhanced collaboration and resource utilization, and through our modeling, a significant reduction of medical student graduate debt. We know that for our target students, if they graduate and at an average of $227,000 of debt, these students are likely not going to choose medicine. We're looking at tuition rates that even without any public assistance stands to be 2/3 to 1/2 of the average osteopathic medical school tuition rates. So in creating a public osteopathic medical school within Pennsylvania, we can not only set some standards within Pennsylvania, creatively address innovative ways to create not only medical education that bolsters healthcare, but also bolsters the communities with an economic infrastructure and development approach to our medical education. And that is community focused and community informed, and in many aspects, community driven. We couldn't be more thrilled to be in Punxsutawney, where we have one of our key partner hospitals under leadership of Jack Sisk and Clark Simpson, who have been incredible leaders along with IRMC and a number of our partners of community hospitals. And we believe that this will be one of the infrastructures that will start to change approaches to rural medicine. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Rose. And with just a handful of minutes I think we have remaining, I can share a couple of other examples of the ways that IUP is an important partner of the Commonwealth. Clearly, the College of Osteopathic Medicine that's proposed is one of the most exciting initiatives underway at our institution. But I'd be remiss if I didn't share a couple of other high points of some things that we're working on that I think are important for the Commonwealth. So I wanted to share our Child Care Access Means Parents in School, which is an excellent grant-funded program that helps students who are parents be successful both as parents and as learners, which with their college degree in hand, positions them to be high-wage earners and support their families and family-sustaining jobs. Additionally, we have a grant project funded by the National Science Foundation to increase the training in for math and science teachers. So again, trying to hit that workforce need. Our nationally recognized OSHA consultation program not only provides critical guidance to Pennsylvania workplaces, but also helps them meet worker safety requirements, analyzes the data, and helps national policy makers think about appropriate legislation and policy. Our faculty are also known for their assistance with various state agencies, including PCCD and PennDOT, with design and conduct of research and assessment to meet specific state-identified needs. And another important initiative that we're really proud of is that we received a HRSA, Nursing Loan Forgiveness Program, which importantly helps lower the cost of training of our graduate nursing students so that we can have more faculty qualified to train the next generation of nurses, lowering the barriers to create the folks that will train the much needed frontline healthcare workers. Additionally, our faculty and student trainees provide speech-language pathology, autism screenings, and other important services in schools for some of our most vulnerable populations. And through an innovative partnership with Cambria County, our counseling students are funded thanks to an investment of a portion of the county's opioid settlement funds to provide access to counseling services in schools, thereby increasing K-12 student access to these critical mental health resources, destigmatizing mental health, and lowering counseling students' educational costs, which then enable those graduates to make choices with their hearts, to stay in the communities that they serve, rather than feeling a pressure of some massive student loan debt to make other career decisions. So as you can see, IUP is really proud of its identity as one of fewer than 100 public R2 doctoral research universities. Our faculty are teacher scholars, engaging students in research and service and innovation, giving them real-world skills and experiences that prepare them for the jobs of today and tomorrow. I hope that today you might also think about the ways that IUP and our PASHE sister schools might be of even further assistance to the Commonwealth in conducting research, assisting with data collection and analysis, and providing information that could facilitate data-informed policymaking and legislation. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I can say this, that within the House of Representatives, you two have very strong advocates. Representative Smith, Representative Struzzi are always talking about the needs of IUP and what you guys are also bringing forth to the community. Even previous representatives like Speaker Sam Smith, he was the first one to tell me about the new school that you're doing. And of course, alumni like Rich Caruso have been instrumental in informing us, and I know helping you as well. You guys have a strong base of advocates working for you. And then, of course, there's Senator Pittman in the Senate as well. So you got a good team around you. I'm looking forward to seeing the great things that are going to be coming from IUP. So thank you again so much for hosting us. And I have to give another shout out about dinner last night.
I know, right? Amazing.
The dinner last night was phenomenal. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right. We are going to turn over now to the hearing on benefit integrity. Representative Smith, if you'd like to give us some brief opening comments, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Chairman Kale. And it's an honor to host this policy committee hearing today. I'd like to welcome everybody to District 66, which is all of Jefferson County and northern Indiana County. Representative Struzzi and I share representing Indiana County, and which also puts us in the unique position of sharing IUP with the main campus and the Punxsutawney campus. I'm looking forward to a great discussion today on benefits integrity and where we as policy leaders here in Pennsylvania can move forward in fixing the benefits integrity. We have two great speakers today that will give us information on that. Basically, when I look at it, I'm looking at how do we give a hand up rather than a handout and move Pennsylvania in that direction legislatively and policy-wise. I've heard the waste in welfare could be in the billions, up to $3 billion, maybe more. And that money, if we could figure out legislatively and policy-wise to fix that, would help the many people that are on our waiting lists that truly need that funding. And I also feel, I want to let everybody know that I personally, and I feel the rest of us feel this way, we're not here to stop welfare and to just kick people off. We're here to truly help the needy and who really needs the help and get the people that are not, that have the ability to get to work, get off the system and get back to work. So again, I want to thank my colleagues. I want to thank the testifiers, everybody in attendance. Dr. Rose and Dr. Creeley, thank you so much for the update on IUP. I appreciate it. And I also want to give a special thank you to IUP and Dr. Driscoll. I know he couldn't be here today, but I definitely let him know last night that I really, really am happy with the commitment that IUP gives to Punxsutawney. and also to, I'll give the shout out also, IUP Culinary School. That is a real gem we have in this town. I'm excited to see the next 4 years of the new building going in. That is going to be great. And then, of course, dinner last night. When they made all that food from scratch, when I walked through the door and was told that, I'm like, wow, I'm going to be eating a lot tonight. So I did. Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you to all my members for being here, and also online, the members that are online. Thank you, Josh.
And online, we do have Representative Owlett joining us and Chairman Grove joining us as well, who has been a leader on this issue. Yesterday, we had a very informative hearing on the subject. This is the second of a series of 3 that we are doing. It was eye-opening testimony. I'm looking forward to hearing more today. And the one thing that really caught my attention yesterday was the 1.5 million able-bodied people that are on welfare programs, and it doesn't seem like Pennsylvania has a system in place to try and ensure that they actually end up getting back out into the workforce and be productive members, while at the same time we have 14,000 people that do need it that are on a wait list. It just doesn't seem like our priorities are in the right place. And that was just one aspect of this that we heard yesterday. At the end of the day, Representative Smith, I think you're right. I don't think anybody's here saying that the social safety net isn't something that's warranted. I think we're saying is we got to make sure we're smart with taxpayer dollars. We got to make sure that the people that need these types of benefits actually get these types of benefits. And we have to make, for those able-bodied people, these types of benefits self-defeating. And what I mean by self-defeating is we got to help them get back out into the workforce because they have value as well, and they can be productive members within our society. So today we have 2 testifiers. We have Sam Adelson, the Policy Director of the Foundation of Government Accountability, and Roy Leonardson, the Director of State Government Affairs for the Foundation of Government Accountability. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. A brief 3 to 5 minute testimony, opening it up for questions. I think you guys know the drill. I appreciate you being here, and Mr. Adelson, it's yours.
Thank you, Representative Kale. Representative Smith, good to be in your district here, and other members here of the Policy Committee. My name is Sam Adolphson. I'm the Policy Director at the Foundation for Government Accountability. We are a nonprofit think tank. We're based in Florida, but I'm from Maine. So I came south for this. At FGA, we really have focused in about 30 states and in Washington, D.C. on reforms and ideas that help preserve benefit integrity and make government more efficient and help folks get off the sidelines and back into the workforce. That's really been our focus area. And so this, kind of the comments I want to give today are really about this. They're about deter, protect, and secure. We want to deter fraud and waste on the front end in welfare programs. We want to protect resources for the truly needy who rely on the safety net. And we want to secure the peace of mind of taxpayers who fund this program, both in Pennsylvania and across the country. So deter, protect, and secure is kind of what it's all about. I'm going to start with a little bit of just a level set, go through some numbers, and then I'm going to talk about the Medicaid program and the food stamp program, or SNAP. And then Roy is going to follow up talking about some unemployment benefits and some government regulation in this area. So just to start with kind of a lay of the land here and where you've come on welfare in Pennsylvania. So we've got on the slide here the year 2000, and then fast forward a couple decades here to current status. So you see in the food stamp program, we've got a couple numbers here: enrollment and spending. And enrollment was about 760,000. These are rounded numbers just to make it a little easier here. Back in 2000, and you're currently just under 2 million folks here in the Commonwealth on the food stamp program. That's a plus 1.2 million that you've added here in 20 years. The spending follows along that path as well. You went from about 655 million, currently 4.2 billion annually spent in the food stamp program. On the Medicaid side, and Medicaid, important distinction, you've probably heard questions about this from your constituents. Medicaid gets a little wonky. It's not Medicare, okay? Medicare is the program for seniors. Medicaid is a completely different program. It's a state-federal partnership program. And as you can see, we're going to talk about this, it has grown dramatically across the country, but in particular here in Pennsylvania. It went from 1.3 million enrollees up to about 3.3 now, and that's down from a high of about 3.6 million during COVID. The big piece of this is look at the spending on this program. It's gone from about 11 billion to 47 billion just over the last couple decades. And just contrast that with the population growth, right? You maybe account for some of this growth based on population. Not the case in Pennsylvania. You have added about 700,000 residents. But just to put that in context, you've added twice as many people to the food stamp program as you've added to your state over the last 20 years. So on the next slide, what is this all for? All this growth, all this spending, what is it for? Well, we all agree, and I appreciated the comments leading off, the safety net is extremely important. We're generous, taxpayers are generous, we take care of the truly needy in this country, and that's a good thing. It's something to be proud of. This is what it's all for. You have 14,105 people currently. Those numbers change, every couple weeks here, but that's the latest number. These are folks on a wait list in your Medicaid program to receive care that will help keep them in their homes and take care of them. These are intellectually and developmentally disabled folks, and they're waiting right now for services. Despite spending $47 billion, there are folks waiting to get that care. These are the people that these programs are designed for. And your governor, he knows this, he's at least aware of it. In the budget, there's a proposal to help fund those wait lists for the disabled individuals. But it leaves out an important part of the story in the governor's proposal. He talks about adding more funding for nursing homes and for these disabled individuals. And we should do that. This is a priority. That's the kind of safety net we want to have, is to take care of the disabled and elderly individuals. But when fraud and waste are rampant in your program, and when able-bodied adults have become the priority focus in the program, there's nothing left for the truly needy or for the taxpayers who are funding it. So that's why we fight back against fraud and waste, and that's why you need provisions that deter, protect, and secure in these programs. And for me, I think right at the top here, the very best way to stop welfare fraud is to get more people off welfare, back to work, and providing for themselves and their families. Next slide, please. That isn't happening in Pennsylvania right now. Right now, the welfare program, the growth, it's a one-way trajectory. It's all people coming on the program and staying on the program. And it's not just enrollment. I mean, you're in the State House, you're working on your budget, you understand the impacts of this. When more and more of the budget is taken up by these safety net programs, there's less and less for those disabled individuals, schools, public safety. Yesterday we were in a fire station over in Williamsport. There's less for roads, there's less for new investments in medical schools, things like that, when more and more of the budget is taken up with these programs. And the growth is all from expansion to able-bodied adults. That's where your growth in the program is coming from, and we're going to get into that. In fact, Pennsylvania has quite a distinction. One right there, the McDonald's near my hometown, that building right behind their now hiring sign is the welfare office. So our thinking here is, look, if you can fill out a welfare application, you can fill out a job application too. So let's at least make sure both of those things are happening at the same time, and we give people a chance to get back to self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. One other example here in Pennsylvania that I want to draw your attention to, this is in the food stamp program. So there's federal law that was bipartisan, passed in the 90s with President Bill Clinton at the time, that says for an able-bodied adult who doesn't have any kids in the house, and they're 18 to 54 years old, that in order to get the food stamp benefit, you need to work part-time, be in job training, or be in some type of education, right? Like, we're going to help you, but you got to help take some steps forward. That's federal law. Pennsylvania right now waives that in 64 of 67 counties. You can click through one more. So what does that mean, waiving it? Well, that means you don't do it on purpose. The current administration has said, we don't want this work requirement. We don't want it. We don't want to have it in play here in Pennsylvania, and so you do not. There are many other states that do, and the result is that folks move much more quickly, able-bodied, from welfare to work and into jobs. And, you know, that's not this may not be the typical thing you think of when you think of fraud in the program, but when you think about government policies that are designed to kind of keep someone on the program when they could be out there earning and being self-sufficient for their family, we think that's fraud by design. Next slide, please. All right, this is more the traditional benefit integrity issue that you would think about. This is the improper payment rate in the Medicaid program, and then I have the food stamp program highlighted as well. The national error rate in this program, and again, you have 3.3 million people on this program, the national error rate is 20%. Makes up about $80 billion in fraud. Most of that is due to eligibility errors, they're called. And so there's a compounding effect where the more people you have on the program coming into the program, the more errors are being made, because that's where most of the problems occur, is at eligibility or eligibility renewals. And so by constantly growing your program, you're growing this problem. One note on this, the governor's recently, he put out a press release not too long ago about how well that they're doing now in the department on this error rate in Medicaid. I think he said it's down to 5%. There's a note of caution on that. They're using 2022 numbers, and during COVID, no one was allowed to be removed from Medicaid, from your program at all for 3 years. No one, regardless of income. If they were on it at the beginning of COVID, they stayed on for 3 years. What they did is they measured the improper payment rate during that time when no eligibility renewals were happening. So there are no errors because they weren't checking anything. And so he's now kind of saying, hey, look, we fixed this problem based off this temporary point in time where they didn't have to check any information. So we go back, when we talk to states, we're looking back at 2019 to find a more true number on the improper payment rate. And in Pennsylvania, your combined Medicaid and CHIP error rate is close to 20%, which is more the national average. So 20% of 47 billion, you can kind of do the ballpark math on that, what you're looking at for fraud in the program. In the food stamp program, it's 14%. That's your error rate there. Next, thank you. This is a chart from Medicaid state options, and I think this one's really important to talk about when we think about kind of how the system's designed for fraud. You have, you can thank Ohio for saving you from being at the top of this list, and Michigan just above you, but this is a kind of a comparison state by state. And here's what it is. In Medicaid, you have an option as a state to accept self-attestation for various factors of eligibility, or you can verify them before someone goes on the program. So self-attestation is exactly what it sounds like. If I tell you something, you believe it, and you process my application based on me saying so. Right now in Pennsylvania, you accept, for example, if I say I'm a Pennsylvania resident, if I say yes I am, you take my word for it, and you will put me on the program based on that. The same is true for household composition. Do you live with any other income earners? If I say no, you take that and process the application. These are really important ways to protect your front end, your front door of the program, is to say, hey, let's verify this information before we let someone come through the door. And the other piece we talk about is frequent record checks. So you have other data available in the state, like your death records. Well, those should be checked every so often to make sure that folks aren't receiving the benefit, after they've died. Seems pretty basic. These are things you're not doing routinely to take care of the program that you could do. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'll kind of, this will be my last example before I give you a couple other solution ideas. This is more your typical fraud that you would think of in the food stamp program. Maybe you've heard from constituents about this as they see some of these things happening out there. This is a market here in Maine. I was the deputy commissioner of the Department of Health and Human Services in Maine before I joined FGA. And one of the things I was tasked with was cracking down on EBT card, food stamp card fraud. This was a store we found, they did $1.5 million in food stamp transactions in 1 year, the Aram Halal Market. They had one cash register. So they're doing booming business there. It was all fraudulent. They were trading $1 for in food stamps for 50 cents in cash. And they were running hundreds of people through there every couple months. And this is going on in a lot of places. It's important that your state take a look at that data. They can pursue some of this. And what we found was that the federal government didn't really care. They're a long way from the taxpayer down there in DC, and they're not too concerned about this. If you don't take charge of that as a state and start looking at some of these, little meat markets out in Philadelphia, this kind of fraud is going to continue to happen rampantly. So there's some things you can do there. The other map there is of Maine EBT card transactions. And if you're not familiar with Maine's geography, that is not a map of Maine, but it is a map of Maine EBT card transactions. That is Florida, and specifically the Disney theme park area. And that was over about a 6-month period. It was really interesting. What we did is we took all the data of every transaction and we started processing it with basic data analytics tools that any company would use. And we found all kinds of folks living outside the state. They were running their card in a different state month after month. We were able to close those cases down. And then we found folks, heading to Florida and spending their cash. So you do have some, one more click, you have a lot of examples of that here in Pennsylvania. You are catching some of it, which is good. There are some states who ignore this completely. Your Inspector General definitely works this problem. 600 people were charged with assistance fraud in 2023. I would say the last year I was in Maine, we prosecuted 200 criminal level cases of welfare fraud in a state of 1 million. So 600 is probably low. There's more out there, and it really, the amount of fraud goes up and down with how hard you look for it. If you don't look for it, there is none. And you'll hear from people, there is no welfare fraud, it's because they're not looking. If you look, it's out there. One last example, there's a Shikshini woman here. I think that's how you say that. That's a pretty good, your district representative. And, this is unfortunate. Certainly all the millions of people on your programs aren't operating this way, but this is a bad actor. But it's out there. This is a woman who stole about $5,000 by simply lying about who was in the house. She said she wasn't married, and she was. Her husband earned a bunch of money. And she bragged about it. She said, if you can see the quote, she bragged about, quote, screwing the system. And this was just from March 2023. And you all did catch her and prosecute her. So that's good. Couple slides here to wrap up on and give you, next slide, please. In the Medicaid program, here's the biggest thing I would do right now. You can do this right now. You don't need permission from DC to do this, is to go ahead and stop accepting self-attestation. There's all kinds of other examples in your life of things you would do to apply for. You apply to go to college. You're going to have to produce some information saying, yeah, this is me, I live here, this income information is correct. And we accept that in every other aspect of our life. But when we get over to the Medicaid program taxpayers are funding, we say, yeah, sure, whatever you say, we're going to believe it. So really easy lever there to just move all the verification to the front end. Say, yes, we want to help you if you need it. We're just going to verify all your information is right before we get you on the program. And that's what all these four are really in that same vein of let's check and verify before we enroll. Next slide. The other really big thing I want to leave you with in terms of solving both the problem of able-bodied adults who aren't working and the broader program integrity problem is there may be big opportunities ahead here in 2025 to rethink the system. And let's make sure when those 1.5 million able-bodied adults on Medicaid, when you're engaging with them, let's put the human in human services and actually help them get a job. Let's connect them to community college, to job training, to open jobs in the state. You're not doing that right now, and you can. And that you'll need some help from a willing federal government, and hopefully that'll be an opportunity for you here in the next year. And then my last slide is on the food stamp program. Right now, there's 0 asset tests at all in your program. And what does that mean? I can have $1 million in a bank account, and I can still be eligible for these programs. And that's an option for you all. You can fix that. You can fix that right now. You can pass a law that says, yeah, we're going to take care of you, but not if you have a bunch of liquid assets available. And finally, the work requirement. You have a couple 100,000 able-bodied folks on your food stamp program, and your governor is waiving the work requirement, the volunteer requirement that's part of that. So bring that back online and watch a bunch of these folks take those open jobs, relieve pressure off your program, and really refocus it on the truly needy and taxpayers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roy, and he's going to finish up with some information on unemployment benefits. Roy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Smith, thanks for having us in your district. And I'm going to speak well of the food last night, particularly the jalapeno pierogies. Really quickly, I'll be much more brief. If you go to the first slide on the next thing is, there's basically 3 big things you can do with unemployment. If you just roll through the slide, usually I have the clicker, sorry. I want to talk about unemployment fraud in Pennsylvania, and this is about preserving benefit integrity. So let's just do sort of another level set like Sam did. You got about 450,000 open jobs, as Sam had mentioned earlier, okay? Many of the able-bodied individuals are not in the workplace. Sam talked about that. You have shortages across healthcare, hospitality throughout the state. So really the problem we have with unemployment is we saw a huge surge in fraud, right? So for example, somewhere between $100 and $135 billion in fraudulent claims during COVID. That number has actually been as high as $400 billion. And the stories are extraordinary, and lots of folks were caught, most were not. Here in Pennsylvania, you had about $1.16 billion in fraud and a $6 billion federal pandemic fraud from the feds during just COVID alone, just here in Pennsylvania. So those are big numbers. And I think it's important to remind folks that unlike Medicaid and food stamps, this is a program that the state works with businesses on. This is a tax on business. There are no employee dollars, no state dollars technically, in these programs, and that the preserving this benefit does 3 things, right? One, it protects taxpayers, it protects businesses, and it gets more people back into your workforce. So the first bold reform is right-sizing benefits. So what does that mean in short? When you have lower unemployment, like less than 3%, you have a shorter amount of time that folks can be on the unemployment, if that makes sense. So less than 3%, you've got states that do it about 12 weeks. You guys are fixed 26 weeks no matter what. When unemployment goes up, you give people longer time to be on benefits. So if you look at that, if you go to the next slide, I'll go through some of these things for you. How does it work? Just keep going. I'll go through it. So it's tied to the jobless rate. Then you can just keep going right through all that. Sorry. And then, so what are the results? I want to give you 3 examples here. Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, the amount of time unemployment cut in half, spending went down, and taxes went down. That's what happened. Next slide. If you index today, your trust fund would go up, your taxes would go down, and your week's unemployment would go down. That would happen immediately for you guys as well. Go ahead. So that's indexing. It's important. It works. I think it's in 12 states now, Sam, are we? We're up to 12 or 13 states now have indexing. And it's a great way to preserve the benefit and make sure the integrity is working. The next one is just promoting work. If you're able to work, you need to be able to work, available to work, and actively seeking work. One of the problems that you have here in Pennsylvania is you have 3 work searches required a week. We think you should have 5. And you should verify those as well. You should collect evidence in support of that. Another issue you have is ghosting. You can go to the next page. Another issue is job offer refusal. If people are offered jobs and they refuse to take those jobs, you should have a way that they can go and report that. Federal law requires if you're offered a job, a suitable job, meaning similar, you're just supposed to take it. That does not happen. Next slide. I want to just talk about this slide really quickly because Sam mentioned that. What some states are doing is they're changing the way their unemployment agencies work. And so in South Carolina, it's called the Department of Reemployment, not unemployment. South Dakota has done that as well. So their frontline workers are focusing on getting people back to work, not giving them unemployment checks. That happens. That's a computer-generated button that someone pushes. But the frontline workers in South Carolina get people back to work. They work with the universities, the technical colleges, the community colleges, the labor centers. Their job is to get people back to work. Next. Really quickly, you can roll through this slide. Ghosting is another situation. That's one of the requirements, right, is you have a job interview, you schedule a job interview, you get to continue getting your unemployment check. What we're having now, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, is people report that, yes, I have a job interview. That's great. That's their job to report that they have a job interview. They're not going. And there's currently no system in place that allows that report to happen. If you ghost, you should not be eligible for benefits at that point. Your job is to show up to the interviews. Next. And then just the last section here is getting right to the heart of program integrity. You can go to the next slide, please. And again, it's very similar to the stuff that Sam said. Weekly cross-checks, recover overpayments, penalize fraudsters. And one of the most important things you can do is get annual reports to the legislature on how it's going. That's one of the pieces that's missing a lot of times is you don't know what's going on because they're not required to report to you. I would add that into anything that you do is that you get some report back. You can hit the next slide. And that's all the program integrity list right there that you have available to you right now that you can put in your unemployment program. And just so you know, if you're interested, we decided to do a little bit of national polling. We've done state-based polling as well that we do. What do folks think about this stuff? It's universal support. Everyone thinks that if you're collecting unemployment, you should look for work and you should meet the tests. And so those are some of the numbers. 91, 74, and 81% support across the board. Next slide. So this is the next section I want to talk about real briefly, and I'll explain why, is it's the end of government by bureaucrat, and it's regulations for executives in need of scrutiny. It's called the REINS Act. The reason this is important, and I'll go back to Sam's slide, is you had 41% of your budget is in health and human services. Well, more than half of your rules and regulations are being done by that same department. So we have a new rule for the rules that we think that should be considered and is working in states right now that I'll talk about very briefly. If the new rule costs $1 million over 5 years, it's got to come back to you. You got to have a public hearing. You got to vote it aye or nay, up or down. The public can come and testify on that. But any rules that cost significant amount of money and the regulatory process, the legislature will have a final say and a final check. So it takes rulemaking and puts it back into lawmaking where it belongs. I can tell you that what it does, the Florida experience, if you just go to the next slide, I'll give you just a little bit. That passed in Florida, you can see the decline in the number of rules that happened. It turns out when you put speed bumps up, folks behave differently, and rules aren't as quick to be proposed. So the REINS Act is an excellent way for you guys to have a check and balance to get you back into control. And I think we've gone a little bit of an era, particularly from COVID, where the legislature has been treated like it's the assistant to the executive branch, and I think COVID exacerbated that. That's not how our government was designed, right? It's divided government, and the division part is a little bit out of balance right now, where many of these things are being done through rules, through executive orders. The federal government is just going gangbusters on this, and we think it's a great way for you guys to just remember that you are accountable to the people, you pass the budgets, and you make the laws. So I'll close with that. We're happy to answer any questions. I usually make Sam answer all of the questions, and we can go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. We're also joined by Representative Schern. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Chairman Kale. Thank you so much for the testimony. It sounds like an easy fix to stop the waste and the fraud, but I think you understand where our issues are in doing this, and that's where my question goes. So we go to Harrisburg, we get elected, we go to Harrisburg, and we're rah-rah, we're going to fix everything, and then we learn real quick that it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, it takes talking, it takes commitment. But the major issue is in split governments, which we have. We have Democrat-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate, and a Democrat governor. So in your looking at across the country, other states that are similar to ours, how did they get movement with these policy directives through legislation in states where you have a lot of different minds on the floor?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. I'll let Roy chime in too if he like on that. But here's my thought: is they had no choice. I think of Kansas, who currently has a Democrat governor and a Republican legislature, kind of as a recent example. Arizona, to some extent, in their budget last year, did some Medicaid stuff. They had no choice. The budget's broken, and it will be here too if it isn't yet. Arizona's got a $2.5 billion shortfall. They have similar numbers to you on enrollment and cost. Kansas was totally underwater, and the people that pay the price we've talked about today. It's the people who actually need the program. It's the local economies who can't find workers, and it's the taxpayers. So I think the first thing is just coming to grips with there's a problem here that needs to be solved, and I think you all understand that, but you may have to keep working that through with folks in your districts or back in Harrisburg. But that's the first big thing. And I think the other thing is once people understand that, I think you said it well at the outset, this is not about kicking people off welfare. It's not. It's not about, cracking down and getting tough. It's really about doing the right thing by the people on the program. Those able-bodied adults don't deserve to be stranded on welfare the rest of their lives. That's not what human services is about. It should be, you don't send them a plastic card and wish them the best of luck. You engage them. How can we help you? Do you need substance abuse counseling? Do you need, what kind of jobs have you done? How do we help get you into the next one? And I think when people realize that the whole effort is about that, then you see the two sides, so to speak, come together around this actual good charitable version of welfare, which is helping get people to self-sufficiency.
I would just add on the unemployment example, that was generally bipartisan. We had a Democrat governor sign it in Louisiana. It was such an embarrassment to everyone. It wasn't a partisan issue. It didn't matter if you were in a Republican state or a Democrat state, honestly. It fell apart and it was a disaster. And so a lot of states just fixed the program. So there's two things I would say is unemployment is a great space to find commonality. Like people understand that this is a tax on business. we need people back to work, and these are just basic things here. We're not denying anyone anything. So on the reform thing, I think the other thing with particularly with unemployment, it's a good example of incrementalism works. Once people understand, wow, we turned these dials, fixed our trust fund, cut taxes, people see it and understand it becomes much less partisan. So I think what you're doing is incrementalism, right? You're educating people, you're letting them know across the state. We've got another visit next week. We're going to talk about this issue. So I think for me, unemployment is probably the safest. And there's a few things like some waivers, a couple of waivers issues. I would also add the E&T program. That's federal law, right? It's happening everywhere. And so you have an E&T program, and you're getting money right now to have the E&T program. It's just voluntary, nobody's participating. So I think there's some incremental steps you could take regardless of who's in the chief executive.
Thank you very much. I think Chairman Kale, we get a lot of talk from our appropriations chair, Seth Grove, on the underwater aspect of Pennsylvania. Right now we're sitting in an okay spot as far as current with the rainy day fund and the money we have set back as a savings account, which everyone should have personally and in government. You need that savings account there to protect you when the income drops. But our outlook years are a problem. We are in I don't know if we're in deep problems, but we have a problem out 4, 5, 6 years from now. So we need to protect ourselves against that. And doing some new policy and some new legislation on benefits integrity would help us protect us down the road. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Chairman.
Yep, and depending on where the economy goes,
Right.
it could be coming sooner than later.
Yeah.
Chairwoman Oberlander.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I really appreciate it, and I think we're all on the same page. We want to get people back to work, and we want them to be living productive lives. But I have a couple of questions, and it sounded to me like, Sam, in the last answer, you were talking about casework and the need to really engage in people's lives, because when you talk about the number of able-bodied people who are not working, I think about an example of someone who used to be a parole officer who was trying to get his person back to work, and they explained that they can't work. And he said, well, why? Why can't you work? Well, I can't get along with people. Well, have you met any of us? I mean, there are times when there's conflict. So I guess I'm thinking about, who is in that pool of able-bodied people? Is it mental health issues? Is it drug issues? Is it a stacking of benefits so that if mom comes out of her job or into her job, does she lose some of those benefits? Do we have the weeds of the data to figure out who are we talking about and how do we tailor that solution? I guess that's the first question, and then I've got to talk to you about the self-verification stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. I'll try to give you a quick answer on that first one. We do have the information. You do have the information. Your department knows a lot about all these folks, from when they first come in. They know how old they are and where they say they live and things like that. But to really get to the level you're talking about, you have to engage them. You have to engage them in some meaningful way across the table of, all right, what was your last paid work? What barriers are you facing? And that is not happening right now. The infrastructure's there. Roy mentioned the E&T program, which is employment and training program in the SNAP program. You already have it. You give millions of dollars to community colleges, career centers, job training. No one's going. Nobody. A handful of people out of millions. We saw that in Maine. We see it in other states. And the reason is because they don't have to. There is zero requirement. It's all voluntary. They will show up if you say, look, you got to show up. We need to get you on the right path. And my wife's a social worker, and it's pretty basic in the social work field. People need a deadline. You need a deadline. All right, you get 3 months, and then we got to make a move. And so that's really, at the end of the day, that's the first best step you can take, is give them a deadline and give them a place to show up Monday morning and get the ball rolling.
Thank you. Just one more quick one, please. So on the self-verification, I really found that quite surprising because I happened to have to fill out a form for a 90-year-old relative. And she gets 23 lousy dollars. That's it. I have to get her Social Security form. I have to send a copy of her driver's license, which is expired because we do not want her to drive. I have to get copies of her utilities. I have to, all those things for $23. And, she may also get some LIHEAP. So who isn't, I didn't realize it was self-verification because I'm doing all of that work for her. And it sounds like I could have just made it up.
And is that in the food stamp program?
Yes.
Yeah. So the self-attestation is a hallmark feature of Medicaid, created in Obamacare.
Okay.
And specifically, initially for the expansion population, which is all able-bodied adults, which is really backwards. They move around more, so they should be verified more often. They change jobs or go to work or stop going to work more often. But that's why in the Medicaid program, and now the Biden administration has expanded all those features. No in-person interviews, no you have to accept self-attestation, that type of thing. They're now expanding that to the full Medicaid population. So that's why the food stamp, SNAP rules don't sync up exactly with the Medicaid rules, and the self-attestations on the Medicaid side.
Thank you. I appreciate the information. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, we're going to go online. Chairman Grove, you've been mentioned a couple times the last couple of days. Now it's time for you to ask a couple questions. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours, Chairman. Thank you for your leadership on this, too, by the way.
You too. This is a great hearing. And I want to read a couple highlights. I actually do this in my town hall. Of the past probably 2 years, these are Pennsylvania headlines in newspapers about fraud in Pennsylvania. So UPMC top position to pay $8.5 million to settle federal fraud case. Grand jury recommends charges for Berks-based home care agency owner in $488,000 Medicaid fraud scheme. About half the people indicted in Feeding Our Future fraud had other state contracts. Monco dentist implanted unapproved medical devices as part of a multi-million, as feds say. 3 sentenced to an $87 million Medicaid fraud scheme that was out of Pittsburgh. And former physician assistant from Altoona charged with $40,000 of Medicaid fraud. So these are real Pennsylvania fraud cases ranging from $40,000 to $87 million. If you think about $87 million and you look at that waiting list, how many people could we help get off that wait list if that fraud didn't happen? While we are in the minority, we've had 2 wins. I want to highlight House Republican Caucus for really focusing and highlighting the importance of program integrity. Representative Clint Outlet, I think he's online. Shout out to him. He authored legislation to require state agencies to comply with the federal do not pay list, which allows us to tap into federal databases to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. The administration actually adopted that last year, we found out through budget hearings. So that's a huge win. Kudos to Representative Outlet on that. And then Representative Cabell has House Bill 876. It's currently out of committee. It's on the House floor. Background on that, as Attorney General, Josh Shapiro did a grand jury report highlighting numerous welfare fraud issues. One of them, this bill was drafted to address that, particularly for home health care. And Roy and Sam, great, thank you for joining us. Can you dive into how much fraud is in the home health care system? This bill would actually require more identification so we can root out that fraud, waste, and abuse within that system.
Yeah, thank you, Representative, and for all your work on this. He's been excellent on this issue, as long as I've been working on it, I think. So thank you. Yeah, that particular program, that's an issue across a bunch of states, the home health care. The root of it is similar to everything we've talked about, right? It's checking, verifying who is the company? Are they valid? Are they in good standing? Are they on that do not pay list? And then it's checking the employees. What are their records? Making sure they're ID'd properly. And then going through the Medicaid payments. We didn't really get into Medicaid payments today in depth, but it's essentially it's the same principles. It's your agency needs to care, and they need to be constantly checking this information, reviewing for anomalies in payments. And we found a vendor in Maine that went from $20,000 in payments in 1 year to 1.9 million the next year without expanding their physical footprint. Well, that raises some questions, and that's the type of thing you see in the home health care agencies. So it needs to be reviewed aggressively. The department needs to care about it, or you all need to make them.
Yeah, thank you. One last question. I meet quarterly with the Secretary of Health and our Department of Human Services. We got into a discussion around prisoners. They want to do a 1115 waiver and expand welfare benefits in the Commonwealth. They want to actually give double benefits to those in prison, both medical care and then sign them up early for Medicaid. Obviously, they need a federal waiver and state law to change because it is illegal both federally and at the state level to have prisoners be eligible and collect welfare benefits beyond Medicaid. We did find out that the department does not check prisons, local county prisons. Sam, at your time at Maine, how did you address local prisons and trying to find that data to make sure that prisoners are not illegally receiving Medicaid benefits, again, taking money out of the pockets of the most vulnerable?
Yeah, that's a great question, Representative. In Maine, what we did, we actually kicked that off. Same issue we had. We kept finding those folks who maintained or got benefits while they were incarcerated. We actually, smaller state, so a little bit of an easier lift perhaps in Maine with 1.3 million residents, but we actually got all of the folks, the administrators in charge of those entities together, and we set up a pretty manual process of actually exchanging Excel spreadsheets. Can you imagine? We didn't need a $100 million enterprise system from Oracle or whatever. We assigned an eligibility caseworker out of the commissioner's office to coordinate that, one person, and they would collect the spreadsheets on a weekly basis, run a cross-check, bump it up against the Medicaid and food stamp rolls, up against the roster of incarcerated individuals, and we'd make sure and remove them from the program promptly. So it may be more complicated a little bit here with more people and more facilities, but really it's just fundamental, check the lists against each other and then process them for removal. Pretty simple.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again, Chairman Kale. I appreciate the members' attendance. This is an important issue, and we got to drive down these fraud, waste, and abuse costs and make sure we fund the most vulnerable. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Kale.
Thank you. Representative Major.
Hi, thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question in particular is about the self-attestation. I saw on your one slide that you have Indiana that doesn't allow it at all. I was curious, I know you said we're like the worst, so I was curious maybe where a state that doesn't allow self-attestation, is it like significantly better than us, just based on that one thing even?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, you're not the worst because you have the Ohio state there right above you on the list. It is better. Indiana has they have some of their own issues, but what you see is a lower improper payment rate overall with that population that's getting the self-attestation. I think one of the other key things is that we found in states that do it well, including Florida, Texas, is when you verify on the front end, you find other information that isn't being disclosed. So for example, if you're checking on my household composition, you may come across other income that, you know, it's not directly related to what I said about who's in the house, but you're searching through available data and you find this other income source I didn't disclose. And so you're keeping people from coming on the rolls that shouldn't have been there in the first place. That's hard to measure from a improper payment rate standpoint, but you have this cost avoidance on the front end when you find those things. And that's what we see in the other states. The best indicator is total enrollment, right? And your enrollment is much higher than those states that employ the front-end verification.
I was just going to add about to do a little Ohio bashing, just so you're aware of it. The auditor in Ohio did a thorough job, decided to look at some of the issues they were having with their Medicaid program. He just issued a report. He discovered there was 120,000 folks in Ohio that were concurrently enrolled on Medicaid in other states, and it was costed over $1 billion over 2.5 year period. So 120,000 people were dual enrolled, or more, some 3. So you see, I think Sam's point is when you have upfront verification, you wouldn't have that problem. Well, Ohio has $1 billion that is potentially gone missing here because they're just paying people. Remember, with managed care, you're just sending a $600, $700 check every month for members per month. There's no incentive to remove anybody. They get paid when you have somebody on it, not off it. And so now they're getting paid in 2 states.
Right, and I'm sure, you know, part of the argument here is that we don't have the workforce to do all these checking and verifying, and you know, we'll have to pay up front to, you know, employ people to do this. But ultimately, we'd be saving billions of dollars on the back end, right? I'm just anticipating the argument.
No, you're absolutely right, and I've always said there's no quicker way to turn a progressive into a fiscal conservative than suggest we spend some money on welfare. You know, all of a sudden ROI, welfare fraud, all of a sudden ROI becomes very important, you know. Well, can we afford to do that? The reality is you're going to save many times over what you invest. I would do it wisely. I think there are a lot of systems. In particular, I mentioned this was Representative Grove's question. You don't need massive, crazy new computer systems. You don't need it. The technology's there. These are just lists. You know, the data's out there. Just match them up. So I think you can hear those arguments and work through some of the issues, but at the end of the day, it's just about the will to go ahead and move forward, do some work on it. Yeah.
Well, don't get me started on new computer systems and our unemployment system. I worked on staff before I was elected during COVID, and I spent all day, every day, trying to help people with their unemployment. I saw ridiculous amounts of unemployment fraud, people who actually were deserving of unemployment and never received it or went 6 months without a check, and all due mostly to the fraud. And then during COVID, we decided to update our unemployment system, which was the craziest thing ever. And I still am not sure that it's working correctly. But anyway, I could go on forever, so I will pass it off. Thank you guys so much for your testimony. Seeing it all laid out like this was informative.
Thank you. It is surprising seeing Ohio on that list. You know, we're used to seeing Ohio ahead of us on other lists, and the governor even complains all the time about how Ohio beats us in all these different ways. I can't imagine that this is another way where the governor wants to catch up to Ohio on. But
we call them the California of the East Coast just to irritate them.
Okay. Representative Kepar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a statement about, I have 2 questions coming up here, but the REINS Act, that I agree 100%. Whenever I was running, I actually someone asked me in the newspaper, and they said, you know, if you could pass one piece of legislation, what would it be? And I said, the REINS Act. And they said, what's that? I said, basically it holds politicians accountable, because you're right that so many times they pass these, you know, make good law in area X, you know, and then we never vote on anything, and all these rules are promulgated and everything else. And I just want to mention that I fully endorse that bill, and I think it would be great. But anyhow, I want to go to the Medicaid enrollment, and I was actually surprised by this because there is a little bump around 2015, 2014, but I was surprised it wasn't more. But you know, Obamacare, I'm assuming, is the reason for a little bump there. But like I said, I was surprised it didn't have as much of an increase there, because so much, you know, some of these people were getting put on Obamacare or Medicaid from Obamacare enrollment. You know, and if you're in the hospital business, I would assume you're not overly excited about that because you know, it reimburses less for private insurance. And one of my hospitals actually told me, well, you know, sometimes the private insurance people get billed more to make up for what they don't pay in Medicaid. So I was wondering if you guys could, you know, elaborate a little bit on that a little bit. And then additionally, you said earlier 64 or 67 counties don't require work requirements. Who are the three, and how do we get more of them?
Yeah, I should have known you would ask that. I'll get you those three. It's on that. It's on that
Forest
list I
County
pulled
one,
from.
you know,
well, I
or
can tell
Cameron
you,
County.
yeah, I can tell you for certain that Philadelphia County does not have the work requirement. I will tell you that. I looked at that specifically. Yeah, I'll get you those counties. They probably would have included all of them, except they have to configure the numbers in a certain way to maximize how many counties they can exempt. And they probably had to exclude 3 with really low unemployment, is my guess. But I can get you those. I'll let Roy answer the Medicaid hospital question because he knows that one well. But on the enrollment, so Pennsylvania, you have kind of a distinction that you share with Maine of having been an early expander state in a bunch of ways. So while Obamacare, Medicaid expansion accounts for, you know, big parts of the growth, you are already giving able-bodied adults welfare, Medicaid, at a much higher clip than other states. So that's why it's a little more even than you'd probably see in other states in terms of the enrollment growth. The only other thing I wanted to just mention quick on RAINS, and I'll let Roy talk about the Medicaid reimbursement rates. You know, coming out of the agency, kind of recovering bureaucrat myself, I saw this. I mean, do you know what a SPA is? It's a state plan amendment in Medicaid. I mean, the most innocuous, boring sounding thing any of us could conceive of, Medicaid state plan amendment. But there's a division in Harrisburg that routinely modifies that state plan amendment and sends it back to Washington, D.C. And it accounts for huge policy changes, huge money, big direction for your state. You don't see that. That never comes before your committee. That's a pipeline between someone in Harrisburg and someone in Baltimore at CMS. And so the spirit of RAINS, I don't know, you know, exactly what, if RAINS would capture that or not, but the spirit of that is you need, as a legislative oversight body, to get involved in those conversations because they mean a lot for your state. Medicaid rates?
I mean, you captured it, right? Private pay, 200+% of actual versus Medicaid, which is anywhere from 60 to 75%. Depends on the hospital, depends on the reimbursement rate. There's a lot of things going on. You know, I think from the hospital's perspective, is they're responsible for some level of charity care that they get as their 501c3 status, but they have a lot of people who aren't paying. And so when those people come through the door, now that they're on Medicaid and Medicaid expansion, they're at least getting paid something. So I think that's the philosophy. The problem what we have and the research that we have is it's not working. States that have expanded Medicaid, rural hospitals are closing at a faster rate than the non-expansion states. And one of the things that's important to understand is if you're a non-expansion state, let's take Georgia, for example, you are eligible for a silver plan, an Obamacare, which is a decent private health care plan, a silver plan, if you're between 100 and 150% of poverty in the state of Georgia, Florida, Texas, all the non-expansion states, for free. No out-of-pocket costs and no premium currently. So the problem you have here in Pennsylvania is because you're an expansion state, everybody by law must be on the Medicaid expansion rolls. So if you're 120% of poverty, you have to get Medicaid. You can't get the silver plan. They move you onto it. So it's really, it's an example of, so now they're missing out on this private pay. The other thing is just the shifting. Lots of folks who did have some private health care plan then opted for the Medicaid expansion, and they just moved on to the welfare plan, and the companies dropped them because it saves the companies a lot of money. So you're also subsidizing the private sector because you're now picking up the charge on those folks who are working 10, 15, 20 hours a week. So it's super complicated. I just think your instincts are it's probably not a good financial model in the long run.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That was a good point you made earlier about the state was already Medicaid enrollment and stuff. I'd like to see like what Oklahoma is going to do, because like they recently approved a ballot initiative like by 1% to go into the Medicaid enrollment, and I'd be curious to see what happens there in the coming years on this.
We got a great report for you.
Yeah, and I would tell you, North Carolina they expanded Medicaid too just recently. They thought they would have 600,000 people ever sign up. So they started in December 2023. They're already at 475,000 enrollees in 4 months here. So you do see big jumps.
They might be going over projections.
Oh yes, they're already doing budget contingency planning. We were there last week.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what I was getting at with this, and like you said, if they're kicking it over to, they're going to have to make money somehow, and if they kick it on the private insurers, you're going to further hurt the private insurance market. Also, the people in the private insurance market are going to have to pay more to cover at the end of the day, insurance companies aren't in business to lose money, so they're going to have to pay higher premiums, higher deductibles, and so forth themselves to cover for some of this other stuff. So. I would say it's definitely a messaging issue on that one. I think we lost in Oklahoma, for instance. Oklahoma is not exactly California, politically. So I think we need to do better on the messaging in front of that, because people don't always realize the impact of everybody jumping on government-run healthcare will do to the marketplace and so forth. So anyhow, thank you guys for your testimony.
I would just emphasize, and it was Sam's point, is make sure that you never lose sight of the main point is you want to make Pennsylvania a different place, right? So Sam mentioned this yesterday. What's a better day for your constituents? Their first welfare check or their first paycheck? And if you guys are focused on paychecks, then all of these other things go away. So attracting new businesses, making sure people get back to work, having work requirements, making sure your unemployment system is tight. I think the whole purpose of this excellence in government, preserving benefit integrity, is your message, which is Pennsylvania works when people get up and go to work. It's just a fact. And we got 1.5 million people who aren't doing that. And so it's not really about Medicaid and hospitals and funding. It's about how do we make sure that more people have their first day as a paycheck, not a welfare check. And I think you're already on track to do that.
Representative Ledbetter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony this morning. Really concerning stuff. As someone who has a heart for my community, as I know my colleagues here do as well, we want to ensure that the people who need help get it. This stuff is really incredible. 14,000 people with verified needs that are on waiting lists. I recall last night in the discussion with some of the faculty here at this campus, that exceeds the total student population here, almost 2x. All waiting, just to concretize what that number is. And when we contrast that with the 1.5 million able-bodied adults that are on the program, that's nearly 15 Penn State football stadiums. Filled to the max. These numbers are not only concerning, but frankly unacceptable. And as someone who represents a very rural district, agriculture is the #1 industry in Columbia County. I have grapes on my property, and when speaking with my fellow Farm Bureau members, we like to use common sense. And hearing your testimony this morning, some common sense things to do that I've heard, and I'd be curious if you guys can confirm this for me. These aren't partisan points. We want to make sure that the recipients that need this help, the 14,000 people who are actively waiting that need to get it, to help accelerate that and address the 1.5 million who shouldn't be, We need to make sure that people live in the Commonwealth, are actually alive, and aren't incarcerated. That's pretty simple and fair for common sense. So, gentlemen, if you guys could just substantiate that quickly and confirm that my notes are indeed accurate, because then that can help my colleagues continue to advance the efforts that we're making in the State House to ensure that living in Pennsylvania, being alive, and not being incarcerated are some great starting points to get this job done.
Obviously, we agree with that. It gets back to the incrementalism that we mentioned earlier. I think it's a great place to start with your governor. Can we just agree that we're going to ask 3 questions? Do you live here? Are you alive? And are you incarcerated? If you just, that literally gets at lots of the problems begin to go away if you just ask those 3 questions, because it creates that environment. And then again, are you able to go to work? Because if so, we got some great community colleges, training programs. We're going to help you. It's all, everything is all there. It's all set up. It's all ready to go. It's just about leadership at this point. Doing this, what you're doing, working with your governor, doesn't matter what party they're in. This is really an issue about leadership. What does Pennsylvania look like in 10 years? You know, New York or Pennsylvania?
Yeah, those are, I think you captured it. Make sure we verify those going into it. Make sure we know what you make and who you live with. And then if you need the benefit, you get it. If you don't, you don't. Really basic.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lenderson, there's also a great culinary school that we could send him to the IUP Punxsutawney.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Does the hospitality industry need help? I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. High demand. Representative Struzzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I want to thank Representative Smith and Chairman Kale for bringing the policy committee here to Punxsutawney. I find myself regretting that I did not drive up for dinner last night. I'll have to make amends for that. I'm looking more for, I think, a clarification. It was about a year ago through the Appropriations Committee, we had a small hearing on program integrity. And you mentioned that during COVID, no one was allowed to be kicked off of the Medicaid rolls. And it was my understanding, and you've said it several times, it's very difficult sometimes to get information or straight answer out of the administration. Human Services is a vast department. But there was a mention that I believe some federal deadline had passed or that had expired, that they could start taking people off the rolls that had been kept on during COVID. Can you clarify, did that occur in Pennsylvania?
Yes, Representative, good question. Yeah, that date has come. It was started at the end of last year that they could start removing folks. The money ran out, so the extra money, the federal government or borrowed from the $35 trillion of our federal debt. They gave states extra money to keep those folks on Medicaid those 3 years. That money's gone, that extra money. You'll see that reflected in your budget as you move along. And the department could remove those folks if they're no longer eligible. So they started going through this renewal process, which I think many of you, Representative Grove, pushed them on. Hey, let's get this done. Let's not drag our feet on this. There's 750,000 people we haven't done a renewal for in 3 years. Mixed results, in my opinion, in Pennsylvania. You're if we're being really generous, somewhere in the middle of the pack. The big thing I would flag for you is that while you have removed about, I think it's about 400,000 of those, maybe a little more, your new baseline came up, right? So of those 750,000, there's several hundred thousand that remain. And the way in which they rolled those folks forward and renewed their coverage was by using a lot of the stuff we've talked about today. Did anything change? Oh, no? Okay, you're good. Ex parte renewal, it's called, where they will seek information, and if it looks like everything's the same in the household, they'll just re-enroll without any further conversation with the person. So I would say the big thing is just to keep an eye on your baseline enrollment number, because it's come up. And there's nothing, other than COVID and the follow-up that would indicate it should have increased. And I think there's cleanup to do there for sure. And you can do that by going back through and doing data cross-checks every quarter and make sure you're capturing new information, which I know there's some bills out there, I think from this group even on that right now.
HB
421. Yeah, HB 421 is one of those.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
So essentially, it did occur, but because of some of these basic things that we do not have in place, there are still people on the rolls that probably shouldn't be.
Yes, and you're going the other direction now, just so you know. You're enrolling more new people than you're removing now. So your trend line is back towards growth again in this program. You're adding people net month after month.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And this isn't a good economy. Never forget that. What you're looking at in front of you, if there's anything, if the economy were to turn in any direction not positive,
Representative Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good to see you guys again. Wanted to ask, and if this data is not something you have now, that's fine, but the correlation between the importance of work, fulfillment, employment, and mental health stability, right? We look at back what was going on during the COVID era where you had people were taken away from their jobs, they were shut down, they weren't allowed to work, and we had all these indisputable corollary increases in suicides, drug abuse, new addictions, all these sorts of things. And I remember that I was on the Labor and Industry Committee during that whole time trying to get the Department of Labor and Industry to reinstitute work search requirements was like pulling teeth. And we were talking about months after the COVID era started, but we still couldn't get them to get people back to work. You look at, watch this heartbreaking documentary up in Oregon where they interviewed a woman who had been struggling with addiction. She was homeless. She was living on the streets. But she said, in Oregon, there's no reason not to be a drug addict because they love you to death anyway. And she went on to talk about how from everything from they would give her safe and clean needles, then they would give her benefits and food stamps and all these other things, to where there was never any motivation for her not to be an addict. And in the documentary, it's heartbreaking. She said, "I don't want to be what I am, but there's no other option. There's no need for me to not be this." So is there a correlation that you guys have in this data, and this these graphs you have on here are very telling, between that increase in reliance on these programs taking advantage and people who end up struggling with those sort of addiction issues? And then do you have the contrast to that, where the comparison of somebody who then does get a job and ends up having to have that fulfillment that comes with employment? Do you see that recovery from these mental health addictions, these struggles that a lot of folks who tend to struggle with end up just relying on the system, and they're never forced to, right? You said give somebody a deadline, right? If you tell somebody, hey, you got to be at work, suddenly they'll think twice about making potentially self-destructive decisions. Do you have any correlating data between employment, mental health issues, those sort of things?
Yeah, this is from a study that was in JAMA, I believe. The number one predictor of whether someone will relapse from substance abuse recovery is if they have a job. We were somewhere on the I-80 yesterday and heard a commercial. It was a spa company. I can't remember the name, but their whole commercial, they're trying to recruit people to work, of course, like every business. And it was one of their employees telling his story about how he was a drug addict, and the job has helped save him from that life. I mean, literally, that's the one thing. If you go to a recovery center, they're going to talk about. They want to work. It's a very important part of recovery. I think the correlating data, we're looking at it. If mental health has never been worse, well, we've never had more welfare. So if somehow, Medicaid is the silver bullet solution to substance abuse and mental health, I don't know how you can even make that argument. We've added so many millions of people, and the problem's gotten worse. I can't think of, I think you touched on it, but this isn't just about money either. It's dignity, right? It's fulfillment. It's being part of your community. It's building relationships. You get a lot more with a dollar earned than you do a dollar in welfare. All you get from welfare is the benefit, and you're isolated at home, getting a card in the mail, whereas at work you're meeting people, you're building experience, social capital. You feel good about what you did. And we gotta count that into this picture, right? It's not just all about the dollar. So, I can produce a couple of those things for you, Representative.
I would just
for
add,
data.
by the way, Representative, this able-bodied adult conversation that we're having, this is relatively new. Welfare has never been for able-bodied adults. And, you know, I worked for the legislature back in Maine starting in the mid-'80s, which is sad, as a committee analyst. And while I was there, and this is Democrats leading the way, is, you know, we made sure that everybody who was incarcerated that was coming out had job training and what they needed to have those skills. We spent a lot of money to make sure everybody who was leaving our prison system had the ability to go get a job. Why is that? The Americans with Disabilities Act was never about concrete walkways to make it easier for you to move your grocery cart. It was about making sure that people had access to go to work. Why is that? If you talk to mental health professionals, my wife was a vocational rehabilitation counselor for mental health. Her number one priority was vocational rehabilitation for people with mental health issues. Spent a lot of money. Why is that? Folks who are addicted or formerly addicted, as Sam just said, we spent a lot of time and a lot of money making sure that every one of those folks had access to job training and to go back to work. So Democrats led the charge in the 80s and 90s in a lot of these things, and Republicans may have gone along. I don't remember. But for 25 years, work was the salvation for formerly incarcerated, mental health issues, people formerly addicted. It didn't matter. This able-bodied adult thing created by Washington and foisted upon the states upset that balance. So these frontline workers who could create deadlines and get them back to work are now faced with the benevolent government. And it's hard to fight against that, as you mentioned. So let's not forget, we spent 30 years fighting for people to have the right to go to work. This is new. This fighting for people to not go to work, this is all brand new stuff that you guys have been saddled with, and it's a disaster.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have any other questions? I do have a very brief question. I was trained in law school not to ask a question you don't know the answer to, but I'm going to go ahead and do that.
I was trained to make up answers, so we're going to work it along fine.
Because this could work well. And this isn't something that I'm more curious about it because we're throwing out a lot of numbers. And I remember the Obamacare fight very well from 2008, 2009, and how that all unfolded and the arguments for and against. And it was mentioned a little bit earlier. We have, what, 3.5 million people on Medicaid right now? Do you have any idea how many people we have on Medicare?
I don't have it in front of me, but we can get that number.
Estimation, is it like
I don't
1
know.
million, 5 million, 2 million? I'm just curious because we're getting pretty close to having a system that's almost half of our population, maybe more, that is a government-run system. And I
Yeah,
know that was the
Representative, that's
big-
correct. Across the whole country, I can say it's well more than half. It made up of Medicare, Medicaid, you know, some of the Obamacare markets, and then things like TRICARE and other public benefits. With the growth in Medicaid, we're definitely right on the edge of essentially a single payer system. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just remember hearing that was a slippery slope towards that. We're going to walk into this, and it's kind of just whether it's intentional or not. It's where
Also, just look at your own pie chart that was on the screen.
and that's what.
If
yeah.
you're a state that's spending twice as much on welfare as you are on education, just ask yourself, is that a good future? It's a fair question.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I'd really appreciate you coming here, testifying. Again, I'm looking forward to having another hearing on this. I'm looking forward to getting things done this session and also into next session. Before I close it up, I do want to say thank you to our film and equipment crew. Oh, we have a question on here. Okay, thank you. I'm going to say thank you again to you for reminding me of that. Representative Schern, if you'd like to ask a final question here before we close up, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I will be quick because certainly all my colleagues covered all my questions and made some excellent points. Gentlemen, thank you for presenting this data and the statistics in such a way that they make excellent talking points. In fact, Josh, I would like to suggest that in future door knocking, do we have the expense budget to be able to hand out a copy of this video to everyone that answers the door and says, here you go, here's our campaign strategy when we win back the majority? Nevertheless, I would like to ask Sam, I believe with you saying you're from Maine, or you were at one time, or to confirm a rumor, if you wouldn't mind. I hear over and over again about how great Maine was in a program or in an effort to get people off their welfare rolls, that the state had some kind of event where you had to do 4 hours, 5 hours, 6, some kind of hourly volunteering in order to maintain your status on the rolls. And from what I heard from numerous people, whether it was caught on TV or and maybe even Fox covered it, that it ended up wiping many, many, many folks off your welfare rolls because no one showed for any of the volunteer work. Is any of that true? Was it successful? Did you do something close to that? And if so, would you elaborate on it?
Did Sam pay you to ask this question?
Thank you. That's a good question, Representative. I thought you were going to ask if the rumor was true that we can get fresh lobster anytime we want in Maine.
Yeah.
That is true. I can confirm. I still live in Maine also, by the way. I haven't fled to the tax haven of Florida yet. But yeah, I can describe what you're talking about. I was there and helped in that effort. We did put back in place in Maine after they were on waived for a long time. We put the work requirements that I've talked about today back in place. And the work requirement, as I mentioned, is part-time work, volunteering, like you mentioned, Representative, just a few hours a week, or being in job training. Any of those things will count as qualifying. And we had about, on the food stamp program, about 20,000 folks who fit that category. And within a year, enrollment was down to about 1,500. And now you can say, well, most of them, they just got kicked off, they didn't comply, and you're kicking people off welfare. Well, we worked with our Department of Labor, and we tracked every single person individually in the data. Within 1 year, the incomes of that group had more than doubled, and 2 years later had tripled. So those folks didn't just leave welfare, they went back to work, they got jobs, they advanced up their career and their earnings, and it worked very well in Maine. We also took our Medicaid program from 350,000 at the time down to 270,000 in Maine, and it really turned our budget around at the time. So yes, the rumors are true. Yep. And we have a couple studies on that, Representative, that I'm happy to share with you with all the data.
I would love to get my hands on that. And just hearing you say 20,000 down to 1,500, that's phenomenal. Well, I'm glad I asked. Thank you so much. Nice job.
Thank you, Representative. Before I hand it over to Representative Smith, then I'll make also brief final comments myself. I did want to say thank you to our film and equipment crew. You guys have been phenomenal, and I was just reflecting on this during this hearing, the different venues that we have to go to. Some are relatively less simple, like this venue that has all the accommodations, and then also you have, yesterday was a little more complicated, and I have a feeling it's going to get more complicated as we go throughout this summer when we go potentially underground and stuff like that. I know I'm not supposed to talk about that, Dan, but we do appreciate the effort that you guys do and how you're helping us make sure that this is smooth. So thank you for what you all do. Representative Smith, if you'd like to give some brief closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you. There was a lot of thank yous at the beginning, and there was some that I wanted to finish with, which was also the video crew out of Harrisburg. Thank you so much for coming up here. Also to my staff, Tracy, thank you for doing such a great job. And District Ops, Chad, thank you for everything you guys do. And of course, to the staff in the Policy Committee, thank you. We, as legislators, would not be able to do this without your help. So thanks for helping us get out here, be able to put it out and speak to our constituents across the state. And so thank you very much. Also, before you leave, we have a very special guest today. Is he here? Okay. So we have a very special guest today. You know, yesterday I listened to Representative Ham and how he said that he thought his district was the most beautiful, I think it was. Yeah. So, you know, we all feel that way, I'm sure, about our own districts. But what I do know is Jefferson County and Northern Indiana County, District 66, is the capital of tourism. We have one of the biggest draws here in Punxsutawney that brings people in from all over the world. Not just Pennsylvania, not just the United States, but all over the world. And he is here to visit with us as soon as this hearing's over. So please stick around for a photo op and to say hello to Phil and to his handler, AJ Jerome. So thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to have today. And again, one last punch, IUP, culinary, thank you.
Thank you. And there was even a movie
about
Phil. Yeah. So Groundhog's Day. Well, thank you very much to our testifiers, to IUP. You guys were amazing. I think what we found out today and yesterday, and what we're going to continue to find out, is the things we're talking about here are very common sense. I mean, asking people and making sure that people actually live in the state, making sure that they're alive, making sure that they're not incarcerated. These aren't complicated matters that we could take relatively simply, and we could also save a lot of money. And you know, the public fisc is a public trust, and we need to treat it as such and make sure that we are getting the most out of the programs that we are putting forward, and that these programs have a level of integrity so that they can be maintained going forward. Going forward for this committee, let me see, our next hearing is going to be on Wednesday, June 5th. We'll have a hearing on program integrity like we had today. It'll be our third and final hearing. It'll be in Harrisburg. Until then, this committee is adjourned. Thank you all for being here.